zero risk n'existe jamais. Or as we say in English, zero risk doesn't exist. There is a complete science that is based on this one single line, and we call it the science of safety. And within this science of safety, I present to you today the topic of my thesis, which is une approche sécuritaire pour la gestion de la autonomisation adaptive des trains, or in English, a safety approach for managing adaptive train automation. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abhimanyu TONK, and I am pursuing my thesis from almost the beginning of this year with my encodrant, Dr. Abdurrauf Boussif at University Gustave Eiffel, and the director of thesis, Dr. El Miloudi El Kursi, also at University Gustave Eiffel with laboratory Courses Estas. During my presentation, I'll start with a brief introduction of automation in railways, then I'll move on to how the system has been implemented in the railways, and then I'll talk a little bit about safety and how we will apply safety to automation of railways, and slowly moving on to the conclusion. So starting with the introduction, there is a real confusion, especially in France, between the terms safety, sécurité, and sûreté de fonctionnement. Qu'est-ce que c'est ce domaine en fait? On l'appelle safety ou sécurité ou sûreté de fonctionnement. So why does this actually comes? So in fact, the word safety in English, in French, it's called sécurité. But sécurité is, in English, is security, which becomes cyber security in French, which is cyber sécurité. So to solve this problem, we call it sûreté de fonctionnement en français, but actually, sûreté de fonctionnement in English is not safety, but it's called functional safety, which is more of an attribute of many properties, like fiabilité, disponibilité, maintainabilité, sécurité, et cybersécurité en même temps. So in short, we call it FDMSs in French or RAMs in English. So what actually is safety? So safety, as is mentioned in French, c'est l'absence de risque inacceptable pour la santé des personnes ou l'environnement. It is as defined as per the norm ferroviaire EN 50126. So the word here, which is really interesting, is inacceptable, because as I mentioned in the beginning, zero risk doesn't exist. So there is always a risk. Whatever you do in your life, even if you go out from your home, there is a risk. So safety doesn't mean there is zero risk, but it's the acceptable risk. Moving on to a little bit on the technological side of the train autonome or autonomous railways, we need to understand how the system has been established, because it will be really hard to assure the safety of the system without understanding how technologically the system has been implemented. So to automatize the railways, we have a system called automatic train control, which consists of three subsystems. The first one is automatic train operation. This system is responsible more or less for acceleration, deceleration, and freinage of the train. So more or less, this system does what actually a human does in the train. Then you have something called automatic train protection. This system maintains the distance between two trains. So in fact, if you imagine yourself riding a car, normally you are the one who takes care of the distance sécuritaire. But in railways, it's not like this. There is a system which takes care of this thing. So between the two trains, how much the distance should be, how much the braking should be, what speed it should be. Then on top of it, we have something called automatic train supervision, which in mainline railways, we call it traffic management system, which is responsible for managing the traffic in real time. Both of them have their components on the ground as well as on board. So we talked about this ATO, which was automatic train operation, that took on the responsibilities of the driver in the trains. So this responsibility of conducting train functions has been divided into several degrees of automations, or niveau de automatisation, or grade of automations in railways. So if you can see here, we have some functions of trains on the right side, and then you have in the GOA1, it's the conductor or the driver who does everything. In GOA2, some of the functions are taken by an automatic system, and some functions are still performed by a driver. And then in GOA3, everything is automatized, but you always have an assistant on board, a person on board. And in GOA4, everything is completely autonomous, and you don't have a single human on board. Within this technology, the problematic of my thesis is how we can transition from one grade of automation to another. So if we have to go from GOA1 to GOA2, GOA3, GOA4, what are the risks when this transition takes place, and how we can define the requirements or the safety requirements for such transitions between the grade of automations. And in order to do this, we utilize something called une approche simple STP pour l'analyse des risques, systems theoretic accident models and processes. In fact, this theory or this accident model is based on two sciences. First is the theory du control, which is more or less we see in our homes, and if you can see here that sometimes you have a machine which operates on its own, but sometimes there are more sophisticated machines which you give an input and they take care of the rest of the work. Then the second one is the engineering the system, in which a system is divided into several systems and they have various interactions. So if you see even for an entreprise or an organization, you have the system de pilotage, system d'information, system operateur. And within this, what STAMP does, it considers safety as an emergent property. In fact, it treats the whole system on a global level and not as per the individual system, and it analyzes the interactions between each subsystem. So within STAMP, we have a method of risk analysis, which is called STPA. STPA is basically divided into three phases. You have the foundation phase, you have the modelization phase, and you have the analysis phase. For us, the most important part is the modelization phase. In this phase, we model the entire system. So if you can see on the right, on the image, we have la structure hiérarchique de contrôle de la sécurité. And we have two levels, niveau organisationnel et niveau opérationnel ou technique. So on the top level, you have the laws and regulations, norms, and gestion de l'entreprise. And at the bottom level, you have the technical system and how the technology has actually been implemented on the ground level. So based on all of this, the idea during my thesis is to establish a control structure for the entire French railway system. So on the niveau organizational, it will look something like this. We will have the requirements from the governments and legislations, EU, French government, and then on the regulatory agency side, we have EPSF and ERA. We have SNCF Réseau, which is the infrastructure manager, and then we have SNCF Voyager, which is the railway undertaking. Then, on a technical level, in fact, the railway system is divided into 8 subsystems. We have 5 structural subsystems, which are in gray here, and 3 functional subsystems. So actually, we can even understand how a train is run just from these 8 subsystems. So from the infrastructure systems, you have all the infrastructures like the rails, then the energy, it provides the power. Then you have a system called traffic management or exploitation et gestion du trafic en français. And this system basically takes into account all the parameters from other subsystems, and it implies control actions on a trackside control command and signalization system, which in turn takes control of the onboard control command. So in fact, what is different in railways is that a train is not just driven from inside the cab. A lot of the functions are outside the train. So we have to take the entire system and its interaction into account while assuring the safety. A small remark here, la structure de contrôle au niveau organisationnel ne changera pas selon les GOA, mais les interactions entre plusieurs niveaux vont changer. But if we come to the operational or the technical level, I try to give an example with the control structure for a GOA2 system. So in GOA2, if you remember, which I showed before, you always have a driver. So if we have a driver, the system something looks like this. We have now the more detailed ATO trackside, ATO onboard, we have ATP trackside, ATP onboard, and we have the driver. La structure de contrôle au niveau opérationnel ou technique va changer selon les GOA, dont l'interaction entre plusieurs niveaux. So for a GOA4 system, in fact, the control structure will be much more detailed, and we will see that some of the components have changed. So in fact, if you see here, in the first image, we had a conductor, but in the second image, we have 3 separate controlling agents, which are first le système de perception, le système de compréhension, et la prise de décision. So which in fact replace the conductor. And all of this is actually happening within a real-time and dynamic environment. The challenge for me, or the problematic of my thesis, is to conduct a safety analysis of this transition. From how will we go from one control structure in GUA4 to another in GUA2? And this is how we will do a analyse sécuritaire de l'autonomie adaptive. This work will be applied on DRAISY, and the first task for me is to, as I said before, have a hierarchical control structure of the system, then have a safety analysis process for this kind of hazard analysis, and then apply it to DRAISY, more or less. We already had a publication in this. It was a systematic literature review during the beginning of the year. And thank you so much.
Il y a des questions dans la salle? Quelqu'un se lance, c'est toujours la première, la plus difficile. J'en avais une, je crois, sur le slide 14 peut-être, quand tu parles du STEMP. Il y a une phrase qui m'avait un peu interpellé quand tu parlais d'émergence côté sécurité. Oui, c'est ça, la dernière phrase, sur la sécurité en propriété émergente. Du coup, je m'étais imaginé que ça pouvait faire partie du concept de base.
En fait, comment assurer la sécurité d'un système? En fait, dans la notion de sûreté de fonctionnement. So in functional safety, we used to consider every subsystem separately. And we used to say, let's say, for example, if the system de pilotage is safe, then, and the system of information and the system operant is safe, then the whole system in whole is safe. But this was not true. In fact, we didn't take into account the interactions between multiple systems. So for example, if I take, there was an accident on a Mars rover where every system was functioning as it was specified. But what later they found was the accident happened because there was a vibration in one system which led to the opening of the landing gear in little advance. So to resolve these kind of problems, what emergent means here is that safety is not taken at the component level, but takes into account the entire system as a whole.
J'ai posé la première.
Et quel est l'apport au cas spécifique de RAISEDAY, puisqu'il y a déjà eu, j'imagine, pas mal de travaux dans les 2 gros projets de trains autonomes, fret et voyageurs. Et puis les trains autonomes, c'est quand même une réalité quotidienne, alors certes dans des systèmes fermés, dans l'urbain.
En fait, j'ai pas bien entendu.
Ah oui. Quel est l'apport spécifique à RAISEDAY, au projet de RAISEDAY, sur cette thèse, quoi, par rapport à ce qui s'est fait déjà dans les programmes auxquels l'Union a participé, trains autonomes, fret et voyageurs. Et l'autonomie dans les transports guidés, ça existe déjà dans les systèmes urbains, quoi. Les métros automatiques en GOA4, alors certes en système fermé, donc c'est plus facile à gérer, quoi.
Thank you for your question. I'll respond still in English. Yeah, I understood your question. It's okay if I can continue. So in fact, what we did on the train autonome project was the assurance of security of train autonome. But DRAISY itself is a project which is here to revive the old lines. And DRAISY is a system, in fact, it's a very new system, which has not been even defined in the regulation. So they are trying to come up with a definition of a système ferroviaire très léger. That is the idea. And within this, my thesis, which was not considered as a part of train autonome, is to how to manage the transitions between the grade of automations. So this was not a part of the train autonome project.
Quoi qu'il en soit, Abhi sera encore là au déjeuner, si vous voulez lui parler. Il parle très très bien français, hein. Juste qu'il est modeste. Merci beaucoup, Abhi.
Merci,